Welcome back to the Ultimate Homeschool Community Podcast. I'm your host, Tiffany Hernandez. Today, we have one of our previous guests that shared with us some very information, very important information. And we have Kam Knight with us. So welcome, Kam.
Hey, thank you again for having me, Tiffany. How are you doing?
Absolutely. Yes. So this is a continuation of a previous podcast that we did before, which is all
Yeah,
about resistance. We talked about PDA, we talked about parents and authority and all of those things. So for our audience, you're going to want to check the show notes and go back over and watch that episode first before you come and watch this one, because this is going into a little bit more on where all of these things come from, why we have them. And Kam, if you can share just a little bit about yourself and your
yeah,
past history, like why you're in this space, because it's a really important space to be in, especially in the industry that we have.
yeah,
With all the self-help and everything, it's really, I would say, important not only for parents, but for also the next generations.
yeah. All right. So I'll quickly just introduce myself. My name is Kam Knight. I am a coach, international speaker, and author of a dozen books in the area of mental, physical, and emotional performance that have sold over 500,000 copies and have well over 10,000 ratings on Amazon. And now I talk about a concept called internal resistance, which answered the question I had my whole life. And that is, why is it if I want to do something, I know what to do, I know how to do it, and I have the motivation and desire to do it, but for one reason or another, I can't or don't do it. Now, in the last podcast, we talked more about the resistance component of this concept. But there is another part to it which stems from our wants. So as I mentioned, the part of the brain that creates wants is unrestrained, and it's creating endless wants one after another. And it doesn't check to see if the want that it's creating is achievable, going after, or even worth pursuing. It simply creates wants, and it was never meant to see if it was worth pursuing. That's because we have another part of the brain, which I call resistance, that evaluates the wants using a whole host of criteria. And if the desire is not in line with any of the criteria, then resistance will prevent action. And in the last episode, we went really deep into resistance. Why is there the different criterias that come up that hold us back and all the nuances of it. But as I mentioned in that last episode, that both our wants and resistance can get in our way. It's hard to
Right.
imagine, but our own wants can create a challenge to what's going after them. And in this episode, we're going to dive into how our own wants can create challenges. And the way how I'm going to do that is just kind of talk a little bit about what I call this part of the brain, the wanting mechanism that creates wants, and how it kind of works. So, as I mentioned, the wanting mechanism is unrestrained. It's creating endless wants one after another at a pace faster than any one person can achieve. You can think of the wanting mechanism like a simple on off switch that gets flipped based on certain cues. It sees someone with nice shoes and it wants it. A nice car drives by, it wants that too. Someone attractive walks by and it wants that as well. And the switch creates so many wants in a single day. No one person has the time, energy, and resources to achieve in a lifetime. Even if you lived multiple lives, you couldn't achieve, let alone enjoy, all the wants your brain is producing in a mere month or even a week. I know it's hard to imagine, but
Yes.
all the wants your brain is producing in a month or a week, even if you had multiple lives, you couldn't actually go after and achieve those things. And even if you did, they likely wouldn't be enjoyable. And that's because a wanting mechanism doesn't check to see if a want is achievable. If it's achievable for you, if it'll be enjoyable or fulfilling. It simply creates wants. Even while you're working on one want, the mechanism will create other wants to chase. And in many ways, a wanting mechanism is the reason you buy stuff you don't need, crave things that aren't fulfilling, and also in a lot of ways why people cheat when they're already in a relationship. And
Mm,
it's also the reason why it's so difficult to do the work, because this
yes.
mechanism pulls us in all sorts of directions, and it's difficult to focus on or move in any one direction to get the results that we seek. So this is just the intro to the wanting mechanism. There are many other challenges it creates, but I don't want to talk too much. I'll throw the mic back to you, Tiffany, if you have any questions and comments.
I have lots of questions, which we knew that was going to happen. Okay, so
Yeah,
I first question is about the wanting mechanism not getting turned on and off. I feel like, especially in the neurodivergent sector of the
yes,
brain, we have a harder time turning off that switch of going after wants versus
yeah,
someone who maybe has more of a neurotypical brain who can say, yes, I want those things, but I don't necessarily need to go after them right now. And they have an easier time focusing on one task or on one thing. And they can let the other
yeah,
things go that they want more easily, or they can put them on the shelf and say, yeah, that's nice. Maybe if
yeah,
I want to go after that, I can turn this thing off or wait. It seems that we don't have that capability as easily. Is there something that is that like, have you noticed that? Is that just me speaking from my own personal, or
yeah,
is that like something that you see more often? Is like there's a challenge turning off that on off switch.
yeah, yeah, 100%. There's nothing that you're off with that. And I do want to preface that many people are sensitive to the label of neurodivergent and what it means.
Yes.
So I'm not going to try to say what is or isn't for anyone. I'm just going to share some experiences, and if it resonates, great. And I do believe that when we look at the neurodivergent mind, there is a lot of an overactive wanting mechanisms going on, and they are triggered, or that mechanism is being triggered and stimulated. And it's not just how often it's being triggered and stimulating, because that's one component to it. The other component is the intensity of the trigger and
Mm,
stimulation. So there are some people who have an overactive wanting mechanism, and it's creating all sorts of wants all of the time. But it's not so intense where they get lost by all the different wants, or the wants actually pull them in every direction. For
okay.
some people, the intensity of it is much stronger. So when it does get triggered, it doesn't matter what they're working on or what they've committed to, because it's so strong, it just pulls them out of their commitment into something else.
Yep.
And if they have and if their wanting mechanism is so overactive where it's constantly jumping from one thing to the next, you'll find that they're jumping from one thing to the next as well. So now that's one component of it, which has two parts: how frequently the wanting mechanism is triggered, and more importantly, the intensity of it. But what also comes into play is the resistance component, because if a person has low resistance, where when they do have a want, there isn't like a strong pull that holds them back or makes them evaluate whether they should go after it, then they're more likely to jump into that. And but if a person has a stronger resistance, even though they might have an overactive wanting mechanism, they're not pulled so easily. So I
Okay.
know it's kind of complex and nuanced, but the human brain is very complex, and it's really important to understand these nuances, because
Yes.
that's where a lot of our solutions lie, especially individually, meaning we're all different. So even though you and I can have the label of neurodivergent, there are nuances to our neurodivergence that
Hmm.
make our experience different, and how we handle it different as well. And so I hope this kind of helps. I really do
Yes.
think that a lot of neurodivergence, it we can look at the wanting mechanism to understand it better. Now, what I would recommend for a person who does have an overacting wanting mechanism is to find a way to ground or contain it. That is, pick one want and cut out all the other. No matter what other wants your brain is producing, don't think about, worry about, or consider them until the first is finished or complete. Now, this isn't always easy, especially for someone who has an overactive wanting mechanism because we don't necessarily pick or choose our wants. They get triggered and stimulated. And for a person with such a mechanism, it's being triggered and stimulated all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so the other challenge of this is now we're living in a time where there are just so much more options,
Mm-hmm.
and our options have options. There's so many more things to do, so many more things to experience, and so many things to like consume, whether that's music or movies and shows, and because of that. And so because there are so many more options, there are more triggers for our
Mm.
wanting mechanism,
Mm.
which makes it even more challenging. And so, what I tell people is that it helps to cut out as many triggers and stimuli as possible. And unfortunately, that means cutting out television, social media, YouTube, and oftentimes even people, because seeing others doing and having things can make us jealous and want to do and have those things as well. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to share my personal story because I struggle with an overactive wanting mechanism most of my life. It's the reason I've written over a dozen books, traveled to over 100 countries, and done all sorts of activities like scuba diving, skydiving, rock climbing, yoga, dance, and so much more. My brain was stimulated by all the different things to do. If it saw something, it wanted it. If it heard about something, it wanted that too. And I realized that if I wanted to accomplish anything in life, I had to figure out a way to contain this wanting mechanism. And I more or less did what I suggested. I cut out television, social media, YouTube, internet. I even went as far as to cut out personal development because reading personal development was also very triggering for me, and took it one step further to cut out as many people as possible and more or less created a bubble that contained as much triggering stimuli as possible. Now, I know this sounds extreme, but I personally believe, and again, this is my experience, that a person with an overactive wanting mechanism, this may not be just the best solution, but the only solution. And the reason I say that is because when our wants get triggered, it's difficult to release them. And it's easy to get lost in the want when it is triggered. And our wants can be very unruly. And so sometimes it's easier to not have a want than to try to always contain the wants that are being triggered so we can focus on that thing. I hope this brings kind of perspective that isn't talked about too much, but that can really shed light on people who are struggling with this.
Yeah, this is great. So, question about how long, you were in that bubble. Do you still operate with several of these triggers and stimuli out of your main peripheral viewpoints so that it's not stimulating or triggering, or were you more concise in how you kept that bubble for like a short period of time, and then you've been able to come out of that slowly and maybe in certain areas so you can still interact, or how have you really come out of noticing and then the response? Is
Yeah.
it still in impacting your life in the same way?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying that some people have the ability to start and focus on many projects and focus on them and not get too stressed out and see them to the end. And if things are moving along, not get derailed by that. When we look at, let's say, Jeff Bezos, he didn't just start Amazon, but he has a host of a lot of companies that he has started. And even within Amazon, there are so many different divisions, which are kind of mind boggling when we look at it. He's not just selling physical products, but there's the digital side of it where there's movies and TV shows. There's the data side of it where he does a lot of cloud hosting, and there's just so much more going on. I would say, as much as some people would love to be like that, the way some people's minds work is it works best with singular focus. where if they can focus on one thing, they will be really good at it. They can make a lot of progress and they can move forward beyond what they could even imagine. Now, taking that person who's really good at singular focus and trying to, manage multiple things is really a recipe for disaster. And unfortunately, because we see successful people like Jeff Bezos or maybe Russell Branson, the billionaire of Virgin and hundreds of companies, we think that we need to do that as well. But we have to kind of work within our own limitations. The reason I said all that is because I realized through a lot of trials and tribulations and just a lot of struggles that I'm of the latter. I'm a singular focus guy. And when I can cut everything else out and focus on a few things, man, I am amazing at it. And although I can get to a high level and think, oh, maybe, I should start branching out, over and over, I found that to be a challenge. Like my brain just works singularly. And I have learned that over and over. And even when I do get successful, at times my brain will be like, you should try that one more time, branching out and see how it goes. And it's usually a recipe for disaster. So to
Mm,
answer your question, I have found that the awareness has helped that the singular focus is what I need. And sometimes I can branch out, but really for me, it is containing as much triggering stimuli as possible. So I've continued to not watch most media. I have continued to make sure that my work doesn't go in all directions, even though my brain wants to always go in different directions. And when it's creating ideas of, hey, maybe you should do this and you should do that, I have to put actually a lot of effort to say no, 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 because I know what will happen if I even just take one more idea. And um, that is my experience. And again, I say this may not be a solution people want to hear, but if we have an overactive wanting mechanism, I haven't really found another way to contain it outside of containing the stimuli. Now, there are ways if people want to go down the medicine route and things of that nature, but I don't recommend that because there are side effects
mm,
and their own challenges that they present. And
right.
so, what I found has worked for me. And I'll go as far as I want to extend that to I even have a hard time going out to networking events or business seminars because when I'm out there, I'm meeting people doing different things. And of course, that's triggering my wanting mechanism to do those things. But what's more is a lot of times in networking, people are trying to enroll you into what they're doing
Hmm.
because that's kind of how business works. And it's easy to kind of get lost because there's a lot of options and then there's not a pressure, but um, temptation to follow those options and it's easy to get
Hmm.
lost. To the point where I actually made a commitment this year not to travel and do anything outside of what I've already learned and just apply that because there's no need for me to add more distractions. It's better for me to just take what I have, my, let's just say my offers and what I'm working on, and take the information I've already learned and apply that first before going out and putting myself in a position where I'm getting stimulated and pulled in different
Overstimulated.
directions.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, that helps a lot because I think there's a lot of us that, like you said, have several wants and we think we can be the Jeff Bezos or the Russell Brunsons. And some people might not even know who those people are. But
Yeah.
the big corporations that have all these different departments and all these different wings and everything. And the one thing to remember
Yeah.
too is that they're not doing it alone. If we're running a really big operation like that, we have huge teams and we say, hey, here's the vision, here's the idea, go run with it. And we're not now we're delegating that. So there is like the opportunity to do those delegation things if we have the resources to do the delegations. But when we're starting small and it's just us, um, it's harder for us to get those things delegated to actually have them come to fruition. So picking a
This
singular
is a
focus, right?
Yeah, this is a really huge point, Tiffany, because a person with an overactive wanting mechanism, their brain is seeing people having all these things. And that part of the brain that triggers a want isn't rational. It isn't saying, oh, well, this person isn't actually doing all these things. He's just hired a bunch of people. It's just saying, oh, he has this, this, and this. And then the brain sees another person who has this, this, and this. And then it starts creating a want for all of those things and assumes that we should be able to do it all. And it's really important to understand that when you actually look at Jeff Bezos, what did he start with first? He actually just sold books. It was
One
Amazon
thing.
books. Yeah. But then it became into everything. But he started with one thing first, and he's hired tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of people to do all those things. The same thing with Mark Zuckerberg. People think he's got all these social media companies, but he really started with Facebook. And it wasn't like he was doing it on his own. He had a team of people that was doing it.
Yep.
And so it's easy to do a lot of things when you have a team and when you get to a point when you can afford that team. But when you don't, the singular focus is really the route.
So I want to bring this back because I know a lot of parents are like, okay, so how does that apply to my child? And I think this could really apply to homeschooling because, for one, we see right now in the education space that public school isn't really working. And a lot of times I think, okay, well, it isn't really working because we're asking children to be focused on so many things at the same time instead of letting them focus on one thing, one
Yeah.
subject, one topic for a set time before they move on to the next subject and the next topic and the next focus. Um, and so I can see where this can come into how do we even teach our children to pick these one things when we're telling them, hey, go to school, go learn 7 subjects at once, go have 7 different things in your brain at one time and be successful at all of them?
And added to the challenge, we're putting them in an environment where there's tens of hundreds of kids who have different things, and the brain sees all these kids having different things and it wants all of that too. You
Right.
know, their friend might be a really good soccer player. Their other friend just got the new video game. Their other friend, has that girl and all of that, and it's triggering wants, and it's just too much. It is too stimulating. So I think it 100% applies to kids, especially because remember I said we have the part of the brain that creates want and then another part that evaluates a want to see if it's worth doing. Well, for a lot of kids, this part hasn't been developed. Like this
Right.
part kind of gets developed really early on. And
Oh,
so
yes.
it's really unrestrained. And this part doesn't get yeah, you know what I'm talking about. And because this doesn't get developed, they don't have that rational logic that we're using to help them say, no, this isn't a want to chase, and no, I should have singular focus, and no, I can't have everything that my brain creates because they just, once a want is there, then they have to go after it. So it's really important for the parent to help contain the stimuli their child is receiving. Now, one way is through what you talked about, where not give them so many subjects, work on a few subjects at a time. But more importantly, it is also how much media are we giving them? How much exposure to other kids who have things are we giving them? How much are their wanting mechanisms being triggered when they go into a toy store? Like all of these things really play into the level of stimuli a child is receiving, and they don't know to contain it. So the parent has to do to really step in to do that. And it's not easy, especially when, you know, as parents, our friends who are also parents are doing those things. We feel like we have to do it too. And when we do try to contain our stimuli, it is going against the grain. And going against the grain is really hard for the brain. It is so
Yes.
hard for the brain to do. Yeah. So, and again, we are presenting solutions, though they're not easy. And I know everyone's looking for a quick fix. But again, when we're working with the human mind and body, it's extremely complex. And the quick fixes, one, they don't work and they actually make things worse. So it really helps to work within the principles of the mind and body that we are sharing. So really heed these principles and do the best you can in working with the overactive want of a child. And I want to add one more thing to help people or help parents understand why a child's wants can sometimes be so irrational. Because we've experienced, a child wants something or doesn't have it, and they have a meltdown, they
Mm,
explode, and we try to be rational, and they can't, and they need that thing. And it's because when the brain creates a want for something, there's a lack that it doesn't have it. And oftentimes, there's pain because we don't have it. And oftentimes, we want something not because it'll be enjoyable and fulfilling, but just to remove the pain of not having it.
mm,
And so,
okay.
yeah, so that child who is acting really irrational is because they have all this pain because they don't have this thing that they saw. And although that want likely isn't even going to be fulfilling, like the mother or father can give them that thing, and it may bring joy for a very short moment, but that joy is really removing the pain of not having it versus the fulfillment of having it, which is why once they get that thing, they'll want the next thing and the
Mm,
next thing, and it can create pain. Now, what's even more nuanced about this is for some people, when a want is triggered, it doesn't normally come with the pain, or if it is, it's light, which is why we can help them work through it rationally. But the stronger the pain is, the harder it is going to be to be rational with that child. And now, if we combine what we said, if a person has uh, many wants and the intensity of the want, the other layer is how much pain that want will create. And to try to manage all that, it's a recipe for disaster. So it's much
mm,
easier to not have the want be triggered in the first place.
okay. You said so many things here. So I've got
I
several
know.
statements and questions. When you're talking about the intensity of the want, it also can go into the intensity of the pain, which is why like my 3-year-old will be crying because even though he just ate, he's wanting more food. Not that he needs more
Yeah.
food, but then it's creating a meltdown because he can't have that food we just ate. Um,
Yeah.
with that, like we said earlier, with the neurodivergent brain, it does end up becoming more intense, which is where that emotional dysregulation comes in because we don't have the regulation that we need to say, okay, this isn't a realistic pain. This is more of a thought about pain. It's not actually physically happening to us, but we feel it
Yeah.
internally, which is where
Yeah.
you
It's
have
a
more of the
pain that comes
meltdowns.
from lack.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so can we talk about the lack that happens when um, that want is not fulfilled? Because a lot of times as well, even with homeschooling, okay, the kid doesn't want to do their math. They don't want to do this thing, but they want to go play their video games. So they avoid all those things to do that. They get in trouble. They get that taken away. The video games are now gone. But now that pain is so bad because of the lack of not getting, but they still then don't want to fulfill their other actual required things that they need to do,
Yeah.
like the math and things. And that can be very challenging for parents to deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah. It's extremely challenging. So, I mean, what I would say is not even introduce these things in the first place. Like,
Right.
why have a television in the house? Why even have a video game? Why have these things where the brain is going to see it's going to trigger a desire for it, and then now we're putting ourselves in the position of triggering a want in our child and then having to say no to it.
No. Yeah.
So the number one thing is remove as many, like I said, triggers as possible. And sometimes it's not easy because we are living in a culture and society where even though we could remove it from our house, everyone else has it. And so
Mm-hmm.
the child goes to the
Yes.
friend's house and goes, well, they have all these things.
Yes.
And in these instances, it really helps to kind of talk to the child about the wanting mechanism, how
Okay.
their brain can create desires all the time and not, and those desires aren't always fulfilling. And then tell them about specific examples where, hey, remember when you wanted that thing, you got really worked up, and then we gave it to you, and then you were only happy for a little bit, and then you wanted something else, and we gave it to you, and you were only happy for a little bit. Well, this is an example of what we're talking about. Now, what's really key to understand when we're trying to be logical with children is not expecting them to get it right away.
Mm.
It's about planting seeds. It's about telling them, hey, this happened. And then when they get triggered the next time, then bring back what was taught to them. Be like, hey, remember I said this would happen? And they might not initially listen, but over time, they will start to get it. And it
Okay.
can help to not have the triggers even come up in the first place, because over time their brain realizes, oh, this is just my wanting mechanism getting triggered, and it may seem like I really need this thing, but I have learned that getting it doesn't actually change anything, so why even create the trigger in the first place? And so with this, when we're dealing with the wanting mechanism, there isn't really any quick fixes. It's
Okay.
more about a long-term game, helping them, helping the child kind of become aware of their wanting mechanism, using very specific examples in their life. But if I could add, it's also to share our own stories,
Mm-hmm.
because kids are designed to learn from their parents' experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm seeing is a lot of times there's a disconnect between what a parent wants and how the child receives it, is because they're almost just telling them what to do and how to do it and what not to do and what not to do it. And as we talked about in the last podcast, it can create these feelings of authority issues that makes them not want to listen to or do anything. But if we can come from the perspective of, hey, when I look back at my life, I made some choices that I wish I didn't. My brain was creating all these desires and I kept going after them, and I was going after immediate gratification, and I didn't build anything that was long term, and it created a lot of challenges for me. And again, the expectation is not that they'll get that lesson right away, but share those stories. And the kids will be like, oh, I didn't know about that. They need a frame of reference for why we're telling them what we're telling them.
Mm. Okay.
And so if we can help them understand the challenging nature of their brain, and again, use examples from their life, use examples from your life, and um, not expect a result right away, but to kind of keep bringing it up until they can finally get it. That would be, I would say, the optimal approach.
Okay.
Now, when we look at the root of our wants, so I may have mentioned in the last podcast episode that I developed a technique that helps people break the barrier between their conscious and unconscious. And
Yes.
I can take people into their unconscious and do the work at the unconscious level. And not only can I help people access their resistance and release the emotions around it or the blocks, but also their wants. And what I found at the core of a lot of our wants, our wants for the nice car, the big house, the money in a bank account, that special someone, all of that, it is really rooted down into some very basic human needs
Needs.
that we have lost in touch with, which is physical contact, which is just connection and conversation. And sometimes, not sometimes, it's really the root of it is just the love of a mom and dad. Now, if growing up, a mom and dad wasn't around, their wanting mechanism starts to, because they don't receive it from their mom and dad, these core things, those needs don't go away, and they get transmuted into these external things that I'm talking about,
Mm.
toys, video
Okay.
games, stuff like that. So if we go and go back to what the child really needs, which is physical contact, attention, affection, approval, that can help a lot in containing the wanting mechanism, meaning holding a child, like having them sit on your lap, talking to them, making eye contact. All these things that we think couldn't possibly work or just be too easy is what they're really built for.
Right.
And the reason I can say that is because, as I mentioned in the last podcast, I've traveled to over 100 countries. And I really got to experience humans on really all levels, from visiting developing nations to first world nations, even to indigenous cultures, essentially on all continents. And I've got to experience what humans were like without any external material influences, meaning
Media.
just living, yeah. Well, not just media, but anything outside of living in the woods. So I'm talking
Mm.
about like raw indigenous in the
Oh, wow.
Amazon, in Greenland, things like that. And so we don't need all these things we got conditioned to through culture and society. What we really need are the basics. And same thing with kids. The kids who have the least tend to be the happiest. The people
Mm.
who have the least tend to also have the biggest smiles on their face. And we're actually chasing happiness by adding all this stuff, which isn't really helping, as we have seen over and over. It actually creates more stress and anxiety, but we can't help get more because we think we just need more as the answer when it's really less.
Right.
And this is going to apply to kids as well. It's, by less, I mean removing as much triggering stimuli and then focus on what they're really built to need, which is the attention, affection, approval, to be seen, to be heard, to be known, to matter, to have conversations, to tell the child their own stories, their own heartaches and heartbreaks, and what they wish they could have done differently. And the child will naturally pick those up and start doing them.
Mm.
Instead of saying, hey, you need to study, it could be, hey, I wish I studied more in school. Because I didn't study, I didn't get the good grades, and now I have a job that I don't like. That's
Hmm.
going to help much more than say, hey, we need to read and write and blah, 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 and things of that nature. Does that make sense? I know I said a lot of
A
stuff,
hundred
and
percent.
some of it,
It makes a whole
okay,
bunch
good.
of sense. It's what I say a lot to my own children because we have had the conversations where you've gotten this thing and then you want more things because that thing only makes you happy for a short amount of time because it's that instant gratification, that dopamine hit. Like it's not going to last forever. And now, coming from a faith standpoint, there is that hole that we get filled by our creator that nothing else can fill, and that simplicity, that happiness, that joy, that long lasting joy that we can have doesn't come from all these things and all of the wants that we think we
Yeah,
need, when, like you said, it's very basic. Children need, these internal things. I really liked how you mentioned that when they don't get those internal things, they want the external things. um, and a
yeah,
lot of times too, parents might be thinking, okay, well, how do I know that I'm not giving them enough of these internal needs, like the attention or like helping them be known? Obviously, everybody is way, way, way busy. And there's so much going on. There's so much expected of adults, of parents in general, of children, even, which is why we've chosen to homeschool. So they don't have to have all those anxieties and extra stresses from even the public school system. But even the parents that choose to homeschool, okay, we still have to make the bills, we still have to keep the lights on. There's a lot of these things that are basic, like, food, shelter, clothing, that have to get taken care of. And so a lot of
yeah,
times it can be very overwhelming for the parent, which is where the screens come in, which is where all the tablets and the games, and like giving them all these things that they want to keep them occupied and happy so we can make sure they have food on the table. And so it
yeah,
it comes down to how society has worked overall, and like why we've traded one type of slavery for another. But that's a whole nother rabbit hole we could go down on
yeah.
another day.
We can go into a lot of rabbit holes here. I
Yes.
didn't even bring up food because diet is another contributor to what's being stimulating and triggering. And
Yes.
people can't imagine that, but I'll just give a frame of reference. when we drink coffee, how good does it make us feel? It it stimulates us, it charges us, and then we want to do things or we want to consume things, right? Just from drinking coffee. It may either want us, it perk up to go do work, or it can perk up to do fun activities, which is, distractions. It could be movies and stuff like that. And that's just coffee. But when we look at other stimulants, they have a similar effect. And a lot of people don't realize, but our food is very stimulated. There are a lot of chemicals that are designed to either be addictive or to keep us consuming more. And when you stop consuming the food, that consumption gets translated into consuming other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And and the worst food is the food that we're giving to children. I mean, it's so
Yes.
processed with all the colors and preservatives and the additives. And so, if we want to really go deep into this, we have to look at what we're actually giving children. And the more whole and organic we can, that's going to be the baseline to start with. Actually, the baseline will be giving them the love, attention, and affection they need, then working on the food, then cutting out as much triggering stimuli. Now, to answer your question about, well, a lot of parents are already extended, what can they do? I want to say that the way the mind and body work, it doesn't care why it didn't receive what it was built to receive. The problems will manifest. So the child's mind and body doesn't care that their parent is overextended. It doesn't care that we're living in a time where there's so much that needs to be done that they're not getting attention. It so we need to understand that like it still needs that thing. So how can we give it to it? Well, yes, a lot of times when we are at our day job, we can't be there to attend to them. But when we're not at our day job doing all these other things, we can enroll our kids into that. We could say, hey, I need to cut the lawn, come with me and help me out. Now we don't have to do the heavier stuff, but have them be there. Be like, this is what I'm doing. This is how the lawnmower works. This is why we need to cut the lawn and all of that stuff. That is still engagement while you get to do your thing and the child gets the engagement that is built to receive. When a person is cooking, enroll the kids. If they're too young to actually help out, the parent can actually just tell the kid what he or she is doing and why.
Verbalizing.
And just verbalizing
Right.
like, hey, I'm cracking eggs so I can make bacon to make this. And we're gonna put this in the oven so it'll turn into this, and then we can have something to eat. We could still have a good engagement that's fulfilling for the child, so it can have that need met that doesn't get translated into the video games and the iPads and stuff like that. So that's one way to do it. Um, the other way would probably be to hire help, but if a person's already extended, they probably can't hire the help. So there are some challenges and nuances there that will need to be worked through. And again, it doesn't matter how stressed out the person is, the parent is, or how much they have going on. It doesn't take away from the fact that the child still needs that. And if it doesn't get it, it'll manifest into more challenges later.
Right, the behavioral challenges. So I'm glad you mentioned about the verbalization and for parents. So I just spoke with another behavioral coach, and she'll be on the podcast later this season, talking about this exact thing, connecting with your child. And what she said was, you really only have to be a good parent for like 30% of the time. 70% of the time, like, we can mess it up. But if we have that 30% of the time where we're doing the connecting, where we're making that connection matter, whether it's verbalizing, whether they're coming with us to do whatever we're doing and we're including them, that inclusion is really where we get that happiness, because we're conversating, we're connecting. That is seen as affection, whether we think, oh, well, I'm not giving them an actual hug, or I'm not, physically being involved with them, but they're there with me. That still counts. It's that time
Yes.
together. And then we could go into all of the, well, this is why they pulled all the kids and put them in these classrooms away from their parents because they want to dissect the family unit and all this other stuff. We could have a whole series on this.
We can have a whole series. And that's a really good point that I was kind of, when I was giving, the answers, I knew there was something more to say and I kind of drew a blank, but I'm glad you brought up that point. So it seems like we need to attend to them 10 hours a day. And the reason we come to that conclusion is because they're nagging us 10 hours a day, right?
Yes.
But if we just spend 1 hour fully focused on them and they get that fulfillment they need, then the other 9 hours they can be on their own and do their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we failed to realize, is that we don't need to actually spend the entire 10 hours with them to give them that fulfillment they're seeking. We just need to give them enough where then they can just feel satisfied and then be on their own. And a lot of times it feels like what they really need is the 10 hours because we haven't given them any. So they're nagging us for 10 hours. And
Nagging.
again, yeah. And it really comes down to the cores. Like, pick them up and put them on your lap. And that's it. Like, not in front of your television. Don't turn the television off. Don't have your phone. Just pick them up, put them on your lap, and look them in their eyes. Like, you don't even have to talk. That is hugely fulfilling
Being
for a
known.
child.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
And I'm glad you brought this point up about not even needing to talk. You could even take a drive with them, you know, and
yes,
and it includes the drive to wherever. Hey, I'm going to run an errand. Come with me. It doesn't even have to
yes,
be going to do something fun. Now they might start nagging like, "Oh, but mom, I'm playing my video game," or "Mom, like I'm in the
yeah,
middle of talking to so and so." It's like, yeah, but that time is more important. And over time, the more you do that, the less they will be bothered by you wanting to spend time with them. We only have 18 years
yeah,
with them at home, which seems like this huge big time, but it really isn't. Um, and so this brings me to another point where I'm like, okay, you've got the burnt out homeschool mom who is spending 10 hours a day trying to keep them occupied, trying to make sure they do all their schoolwork, trying to keep them up to date with all their chores and all the things and keeping them busy, right? Meanwhile, she's burning out. She absolutely hates it because now um it's not the fun, loving, carefree thing that she thought it was going to be, because she's trying so hard to keep them occupied. How could you maybe translate that for that parent? Because
yeah.
we have several in this boat where they're like, I'm not doing enough, so I have to do more, and it's still not working, and my kids still aren't, they aren't doing this, they aren't doing that. Like, we're still disgruntled about so many different things.
My initial thought and what I have seen is to help the children help each other. So have the oldest help the second to the third, trickle down, versus as being the parent trying to help each individually. As I mentioned, I've traveled to over 100 countries, and it's really different in the culture we're on compared to what I've seen. I have seen, and it's not always the case, especially in the Latin American culture, where the siblings tend to get along much better, and there isn't all of this work that is needed to maintain each person because they are kind of taking care of each other. And when you look at families that have had tons of kids, like 7, 8, 9, 10 kids, they manage because of that. It, they were all the children were enrolled in to help the other children versus the two parents taking care of them all on their own. So that would be the best thing we can do. And if we haven't started it on the right foot from the get-go, it's going to be hard to transition, but
Yes.
doesn't mean it's difficult. It can
Right.
be done if approached the right way.
Right.
And I think that would be really the best place to start. Again, try to cut out as many damaging distractions such as media, because we're just going to stimulate their wanting mechanism even more, or even food or unhealthy foods, because it's going to trigger not only the wanting mechanisms, but the pain and the anxiety and all of that. People don't imagine, but our food is giving kids anxiety. It's
Yes.
creating a lot of
Chemical
mental and
imbalance.
both emotional
Yeah.
imbalances. Yes. And so that's going to be the best place to start, I think. Yeah. I wish
That's
I could
great.
offer something more detailed, but that's really, I feel like
It's
it
simple.
always has to come down to the root. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I know there is backlash on that. Well, now you're having children to be the parents and you're not doing your job and like how dare you make your child be responsible for their siblings? Anyway, that can go like down a whole
No, no,
nother
no, no,
rabbit
no.
trail. But they
That's stupid. I have to say
yes.
that's not, that just doesn't, whoever brought that up isn't even,
Oh,
that's not even
there's
a real good argument. Like
there's
I
a
shouldn't
lot
have people.
of people that think this.
Okay.
And I'm glad you bring it up because we are creating that family unit, that family bond. You are wanting them to help.
Yes.
You are wanting them to have that sense of team spirit, that unity.
Yes.
And this helps to solidify that. It's not that you're like forcing them to do these things, but you're being the model, showing them how this is how we do these things so we can grow stronger, so we can have that bond, which is why a lot of larger families are very close together.
Yeah.
They take care of each other a lot better than maybe even some of the other types of families that we see
Yeah.
because of that one element
Yeah.
of taking care of
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't mean to say stupid because lack of better words that came out, but really that is the way it's it's done. I think the way we humans were meant to be done is
Community.
um yeah, the community, like the families a community, they help each other out. The brothers and sisters help each other and take care of each other.
Right.
And that's what builds family, not spending all our time trying to manage each person
Yes.
and hoping they don't do anything that's going to be destructive or creating more challenges for each other. So yeah, I want to add to it. I think what a especially a single parent that would help them to understand is a parent needs to be many roles to their child. They need to be a father, they need to be a mother, they need to be a friend, they need to be a coach or kind of like a figure that they can look up to.
Mentor.
They need, yeah. And it's possible for one person to play all those roles because a child doesn't need all those roles all the time at the same time. They just need it in different moments. So, in some moments, show up not as a mother, but just as an equal. Like, talk about stupid stuff and think and, like giggle and laugh and tickle them and whatever. And then other moments, show up as a mother saying, "Hey, I'm here to take care of you. What is it that you need?" and stuff. Show them as a stern person, "Hey, I want to make sure that you're building the good routines and habits. So I need you to clean this room and whatever." And in some of the other roles that they may need. And again, I don't think it's too much of a stretch for one person to show up in all the roles the kids need. I really don't think so. I think it is possible. And because as kids, we do need all these roles. And if a person is single or if it's just a parent, a father or mother, they might not be able to get it with just two people. But if we can shift how we show up, it'll fulfill them in those ways. And I think it's possible. But the most important is to not just show up in the more adult roles, but also in the fun kid roles where we're just equals with them and
Play.
doing bubbles and play and laughing and making
Yes.
stupid jokes. Um, the thing that I've noticed, because although I don't have kids, I have sisters whose nieces and nephews that I have been like a father and mother figure to. I've seen this over and over, but they love being tickled. The
Yes.
more you're tickling them, like the more that's going to build that bond. And a lot of times we can reprimand in more fun ways. Like if
Mm-hmm.
they did something that they shouldn't, like instead of yelling, like tickle them,
Mm-hmm.
and in a more fun way approach of, I found that they respond to that more than
Better.
saying, "Oh, you did something wrong." Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
The more they're laughing, because here's the thing: there's a purpose to pleasure and joy. It's to pull us towards what the brain thinks is good and positive, right? So when a person gets pleasure from a TV show, their brain learns to pull them towards television. But
Mm,
if they get pleasure towards being tickled and having fun with you, their brain has them pull them towards you.
okay.
So you want to have those kinds of things as well into the mix.
Gotcha. There, yes. And I'm glad that you mentioned about positive reinforcement, even though there's a lot of different parenting styles. There's every every child still needs positive reinforcement, whether it's from a consequence or from like, hey, you did something right, and I really appreciate it. Just verbalizing that appreciation to them as well helps them want to listen more, as well as getting their needs met, which then in turn, like you said,
Yeah,
means that they don't need or have as many wants. You're saying, the children with the least amount of things are the happiest. And why is that? Because their needs are getting met by their parents or, their guardians. And so they're not needing as many things, but also they don't have all of the influence of the shopping and the TV
yeah,
and the advertisements and the media and the magazines. Um, and there is it's all psychological of economics, right? And how they want you to buy because we're a consumer industry. Um, and so it's hard because, like you said, the next door neighbors or the kids in your co-op or the kids at school, they have the nice shoes, they have the video games, they have the bags or the houses that
yeah,
our kids want or the music that they want to listen to. And so it's a really big draw, and you can't always stop them from seeing what everybody else has. You can't just not walk
yeah,
out your door and not go to the store and get the groceries or whatever, and they're going to see these things. However, if they're having their needs met by like those internal needs, like you mentioned, they won't want all of those other things that they think they need to make them happy because you're fulfilling that
yeah,
happiness. Do I got that right?
yeah. 100%. And if I could add to that, if we can actually help them become aware, also take that one step further, where when they do see these things and they want it, help them become aware that it might not actually create the lasting fulfillment that they are seeking, and then use examples from their life as well as the parent's own life and kind of plant the seed that'll add to it. Yeah. And if I can add or make one thing clear that I just want to make sure is when we are reprimanding our children, it can be done many ways. We can yell at them, we can give them a silent treatment and all of that, but it can also be done in a fun way where they're getting the engagement that they need or are seeking and still learning what they did wrong or how to do it right. Like it doesn't have to be done in a way where they're being put down for them
Right.
to learn. It could just be like, in fact, we could even use the same words. We can say, "How many times have I told you not to do this?" Or we could be like, "How many times have I told you not to do this?" And this comes off more fun, and they're like, "Oh yeah," and it's haha, and it's fun. The one thing I do want to bring up, kind of drawing a blank, hopefully it comes right now, and it isn't. But when it does, I'll talk more about it. So,
I wanted to circle back around with your technique because, like we mentioned before, on the other podcast, we had talked about hypnosis. It's not that, but there is a way that you do
help people go
allow
into
the
their
person to
unconscious.
get to that subconscious choice. Can you explain a little bit more about how you help with, even because this also, which we mentioned last time, it talks about the
Yeah.
generational element of this and how it's brought down from parent to child and from child to grandchild. And so a lot of these wants and needs are passed down to our children just from our subconscious and how we've been managed, how our parents have been managed and their parents have been managed. So this is like, how do we actually help to solve our own wants and get our own needs met? Um, so that way we can pass down and break those chains of like that, those generational issues.
Yeah, so I developed a technique which I call the Kam Knight method that disengages our unconscious mind, the barrier between our conscious and unconscious, and to go into the unconscious. And what I found is majority of our challenges, whether it's our blocks, whether it's our beliefs, whether it's our own wants, have an emotional charge to them. Because even when we have a wanting, there's like an emotion to it. And the stronger it is, it's like a stronger that emotional reaction that pushes us. And what I found is when we can release the emotions around these things, a lot of the things that, a lot of the challenges that we have, and a lot of the challenges that came from our past and from the generations tend to subside. It's called doing the work, is doing your own work. Though doing the work is hard because no one's really looking at it at the emotional level. And the reason they're not is because it's really hard to access emotions. We have a defense mechanism that's designed to protect us from pain, including emotional pain. So when we have these emotions, it makes it difficult to access it. And because I did figure out a way to disengage it to access, we can actually, what's the release a lot of the weight that we're holding on from our own upbringing, as well as through the chain of cycles from different generations quite rapidly. Now, it's not something that a person can do on their own. It took me 20 years traveling to over 100 countries to develop this method. And although I've gotten fairly good at guiding it, I do want to teach this method to others so we can spread it. But right now, it's not like a one off thing for many reasons, in addition to the fact that it took so long to develop. And I don't think someone's going to spend 20 years just to learn that. It's when we're doing the work on our own, sometimes our own brain creates challenges. It's hard to stay focused on what's going on in our unconscious, and our brain is really good at distracting us and things of that
Mm.
nature. So it really helps to be guided through the process. And that's more or less what I do. If somebody was interested in that, they can reach out or email me at coach@kamknight.com, and I can talk to them more about if it'd be right for them and things of that nature. But there is a way, hope is not lost, and this is probably one of the fastest ways.
That's great. I'm glad you mentioned about releasing the emotional trauma. Well, from what I've just been learning doing the inner work as well, is how much these emotional traumas are actually connected to physical ailments and diseases, and the emotional traumas end up going to different parts of our body and surfacing in certain ways, like with different kinds of ailments, right? So, like, to your liver, or, a chronic inflammation or chronic fatigue or what have you. It can affect a whole host of things. You could be eating 100% right. You could be doing all the right things. And yet these traumas are still in your cells because your cells remember for several generations,
Yeah.
right? And so being able to release these emotions and being able to understand, like, okay, we're turning off this switch of wanting, they kind of go hand in hand, along with saying, okay, once we're doing all this release, you're not only releasing those emotions but also the physical ailments. Have you seen that as well?
Yeah, there's strong indication that our past, I don't like to use the word trauma because it's a word that's reserved for a specific profession, and I don't want to tread lines in any
Right,
professions.
right.
But when we have experience, trauma, PTSD, bad breakup, extended periods of loneliness, those things stay in our body. It doesn't like the emotion doesn't release unless we have released it. Now, there's a lot of talk around how animals naturally know how to do it, and I'm sure we probably knew how to do it as well, but society conditioned us out of it. So we hold these things in and distract ourselves by consuming. And
Right.
if we want to go deep, we can talk about that. And I feel like there is a big reason why some, I think this could have been a much easier process for us to have developed growing up, like how to process emotions, but we were never taught to. We don't even, unless someone is following podcasts or personal development and the right kind of personal development, the concept of emotions doesn't even come up. Like and when it does, it's usually in the realm of emotional intelligence, where I feel like it's kind of lacking because it's just talking about awareness of your emotions and kind of managing them and not so much really accessing them at a deep level and releasing them. So unfortunately, there isn't too much out there that a person can use to work on accessing and releasing emotions, especially at a deep level. And so we do end up holding this in. And unfortunately, there is a barrier between our conscious and unconscious. So we don't get to see what in our conscious is affecting us.
Mm.
Meaning, right now, a person can be like, oh, yeah, I don't feel like I have much emotional stuff going on. And that's because they can't see what's in their unconscious. So the other added challenge of it is not even seeing what's there and to the extent of it. But just like when I said, just because a parent is busy doesn't mean the child will have less needs to
Need.
fulfill.
Right.
And the same
Right.
thing with emotions. Just because we're not taught emotions, how to access and process them, how to release them, or are even aware of it, doesn't mean it gets unnoticed. It will manifest. It does manifest. And it can manifest in three main levels. It can manifest in the mental level, the emotional level, and physical level. Mentally, you can create things as simple as brain fog or more extreme as an overactive mind where your thoughts jump from one thought to the other, or you have so many thoughts in your head, it's really hard to focus. Emotionally, we can either get numb or we have a hard time processing emotions in healthy ways. So we react or shut down versus taking things, at face value. And then physically, it can manifest in a lot of the stuff that you mentioned, challenges with our liver, our digestion, and even other problems where we may need to start taking medication, not because we're not eating right or doing all the other things that can be contributing to our health, but only because we have these locked up and suppressed emotions inside that need to be released. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm
A-
glad you
And
mentioned both of, all three of the levels because it can affect all of these, which is why we're talking about how this is connected to your wants and your needs. Because once parents understand that they have their own wants and needs that are either going unmet, and that also comes out in how you react with your child or how you respond to your child, and then how they get their needs met. If you're not getting your needs met, how are you going to meet somebody else's needs? Which is really what it
yeah,
boils down to. I think this has been a
yeah,
great conversation. I will definitely have to have you come on again so we can, go more
sure.
in depth about even releasing emotions because that is a huge ticket item right now, especially in the educational sector. There's a lot of talk about having the social emotional skills and how do we teach that, and if they're homeschooled and they're just in their own families, how can they learn those things? They need to be out and socialize with other kids outside of their family, and anyways, the list goes on and on, so there's always
Yeah.
something to be
So
had about this.
I know you kind of talked about going too deep. I do think that it's not a topic that peop there's a lot of talk about wanting to have social emotional conversations and teaching to children. And I don't know if you realize this, but it's been happening for like the last 20 years. And although there's a lot of talk about it, Nothing is being done to actually put it into
Correct.
place. And I think it's premeditated. I think there's a reason why it hasn't been, even though everyone knows how important it would be. So I'm going
Yes.
to leave
Oh,
that
yeah.
to.
Another rabbit hole. Another rabbit hole.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. So, Pam, if they want to connect with you, if they have any other additional questions, we'll be putting your information in the show notes. But what is the best place? Where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, so I've got 3 free guides for everyone here. They're not necessarily for, actually could be really helpful for parents. The first guide is called Prompt Engineering for Your Mind. The human brain was original ChatGPT, and you can prompt it just like ChatGPT to not only give you answers and solutions, but take action on those answers and solutions. And you can learn that from the first guide. The second guide is called Build Habits, Skills and Habits in Your Sleep. We can do a lot more things and do it a lot more efficiently and at a high level if we can work on changing our unconscious first. And the second guide teaches you how to do that. The third guide talks more about this concept of internal resistance. In a way, we presented it in kind of a broken fashion because we talked about resistance in the last podcast and the wants in this podcast. And we kind of veered a little bit and talked a little bit about emotions, which is really important, especially when dealing with kids. But that topic has a really linear approach where it'll go into more challenges our wants create, more causes of resistance than we have discussed in this or the last podcast, as well as the tricks that come up. And they can get all 3 of those guides on my website at kamknight.com. And if anybody wants to do one-on-one work with me, they can email me at coach@kamknight.com. I mean, this technique is pretty epic. I've had some massive shifts for a lot of people, especially in the area of the emotions. Though the first guide, Prompt Engineering for Your Mind, will be really great to use with kids because there's a part of our brain designed to seek answers anytime a question is asked. And it doesn't matter if the question is asked by you or someone else, once a question is heard, it in some ways it disengages other processes that makes them think about the answers and brings possible solutions into their head. So a lot of times when we're dealing with kids, we're trying to tell them what to do, or we're telling them not what to do. But there's a great interrupt that we can use with kids, and it's a question. So if a child is doing something that we shouldn't, or we want to help them stop, we can be ask the child, "Hey, how can you stop doing that?" Or "How can we stop doing this?" And unbeknown to the child, it'll trigger that mechanism and it'll have them start thinking of possible answers. Now, it may not immediately work in that moment, but
Right.
again, when we're dealing with children, it's the long game. We're planting seeds. We ask questions enough, like, "Hey, how can we get focused on this homework?" Or, "Hey, where's your homework?" Um, or yeah, "Can you bring the homework to the living room so we can work on it?" As we ask questions, it and we can ask them in the right way that'll lead them to the outcome that we're ultimately seeking. And it can also be great in building that connection where once a child comes home from school, we may want to give them that connection, but they may not be at a place for it. So we can just ask them a question. "Hey, how was your day?" And if they give a really short answer, we'll ask a more deeper question. "Well, what did you do today? What about today did you like most? What didn't you like?" And oftentimes, all you need is to ask the question, and sometimes they'll just like kind of give you everything you need. Other times, it's not as um, easy, so you may have to ask the right questions and get good at it. But questioning can be huge with
Yes.
children.
I'm so glad you brought that up. And we will definitely have those in the show notes so you can get to them easily. It has been such a pleasure, like I said, and I'm so glad you could join me to finish this out.
Yeah.
I would love to have you on as well to talk more about this internal dialogue and impacting outcome by disrupting the child's thought process with questions, because I have seen that a lot in personal development as well, leaving an open-ended question that you might not be able to answer because your brain will start working on it subconsciously, which is a great
Yes.
way to get children to also further their own desires or like their own questions about just all different types of things. And you can get
Yeah,
them
we can go in so many directions with
engaged.
it, but yeah,
Yes. Oh, that
yeah.
too. Yes.
And it
And
can
the
help them.
emotions. We will definitely have several. We'll just do a whole Kam
Yeah,
series as well. All right, everyone.
yeah, that's no problem. I'm happy to provide as much knowledge as possible. And again, everyone has different experiences. So what a word means to them may not necessarily apply to others. So what I say, I'm not saying as a hard and fast rule, but just things to think about and how you can apply it in your own life.
Right. Right. Exactly. We're all about application and making it simple. These are easy things to do. Well, they're simple things to do. They're just not always easy, right? They sound easy, but they're not always easy to implement. And that's where having a guide or somebody to help you stay the course is really important, especially not only for you, but
Yeah.
for your children. Um, all right, Campbell, until next time, happy homeschooling, everyone, and thanks so much for joining.
Thank you very much.